This morning, we're going to be speaking with Lyuba Yakimchuk. Lyuba Yakimchuk was born in 1985 in the town of Pervomaisk in the Luhansk region. She graduated from Tarashevchenko National University of Luhansk and the Kyiv Mohila Academy. Yakimchuk is an award-winning poet, playwright, and screenwriter. Her recent appearance on the Grammys, together with John Legend, brought worldwide attention to her work. A selection of her stunning poems in English translation, Apricots of Donbass, was published in 2021 by Lost Horse Press. The book, translated by Oksana Maksimchuk, Max Rosuchinsky, and Svetlana Labochkina, opens with a riveting account of the effects on her family and herself of the Russian war's beginnings in 2014. She was forced to leave Luhansk for Kyiv, from which she was temporarily displaced during the Russian assault on that city, but to which she has now returned. Her account of life in Luhansk under occupation gives us a vivid sense of how it feels to become a stranger in your own home. Welcome, Lyuba.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Askold.
So, Lyuba, I wonder if we might begin by you're telling us a little bit about life in Pervomaisk and kind of growing up there in the years long before any of this began.
Okay. I grew up in a small town. Pervomaisk is a very small town where I could see a slag heap from my parents' yard. We had a kind of private house. And usually people compare these slag heaps with Egyptian pyramids and so on. And it's like feeling of the space, you know, it's like something majestic maybe. It were for us and it were for our friends. And we have an incredibly warm summer in Donbass and it's very cold in winter. And in the spring, you could see the wild apricots in bloom in this region, and it's very significant for Luhansk and Donbass region. And in the 90s, when I was a child, these apricots were still a way to earn money for us, because it's after the collapse of the USSR, there was a huge economic crisis in Ukraine, and people literally had nothing to live on. But there were these wild apricots, and we sold them to conductors of the train that passed from Kyiv to Moscow. And it's like it was like paradise for me, maybe, and maybe for everyone it is like family home, and family town is like paradise. And it's very nice place for me. And when I was a 7 or something like this, my dad used to talk to me about politics, and my dad worked as a miner on a local mine in this town, and Ukrainian miners were co-authors of Ukrainian independence, and they said about it. It was the main maybe political message for me and my sister, which my father did. He said that it was thanks to the miners' strikes that they economically pushed for Ukrainians' independence, and he was very proud of it at this time, and I guess it could shape me. And he told me, Lyuba, remember, we are Ukrainians, and we know about different things about this region, and I could say it's usually they aren't true usually, and atmosphere was like this, very patriotic, and so on.
Yeah. So, when did poetry enter your life?
I started writing when I was a 9-year-old, and I just tried to do this. my first poem was written in Russian, and this experience was very strange for me because it looked like it isn't mine poem, and I tried to write in Ukrainian, and it was more better for me, and I feel it like something which made by me, not by somebody else, and. I started. It was like my family. Everyone speak Russian in my family. It's like it isn't even Russian. It's like local dialect of Ukrainian language, and usually people call it like Russian. But if we are talking about linguistic research, it's a dialect of Ukrainian language, and there was Russian words in this language, but phonetically, grammatically, and so on, it's just Ukrainian language, and maybe that's why it was more. It fit more for me, and I guess so.
Yeah.
And my teacher at school, it was the Ukrainian literature teacher. She supported me in my writing, and I just continued to write. And of course, it was like a childish writing. It was not so. The quality wasn't so good, but it was a kind of experience which helped me to discover language, and it always helpful for writer, I guess. And I started at 9, and now I'm 36, and I'm still writing. Yeah.
Yeah. So were there writers of an older generation who were important to you? I know that you write in your an essay, the introduction to Apricots of Donbass, about Zemenko, and but were there others living writers from your area or from elsewhere in Ukraine who you read, who inspired you, who made you want to really kind of understand and pursue literature as a way of life?
Okay. I guess firstly I should mention Baroque poet Clemente Zinoviev, who described all strata of population in his poems, and you could compare with Apricots of Donbass, where I written about miners and workers and so on, and Clemente Zinoviev, it's Ukrainian Baroque poet who gave their voices of various professions, lots of professions, and he created a poetry collection on professions, and I guess writing is always ideological, and if we could mention Roland Barthes' writing Degree Zero, it's about this. It's like I mean, it's right to write about different profession and different people. It's kind of ideological things as well, and I like this approach. And if we're talking about minors, they weren't represented. They weren't in literature, in Ukrainian literature, and also Eastern Ukraine wasn't enough represented in Ukrainian literature, and that's why maybe it's like one of my main idea why I wrote the poem Apricots of Donbass. And when I wrote it, I kept in my mind Clemente Zinoviev, and maybe my next favorite period will be the beginning of the 20th century, already mentioned Mikhail Semenko, and also it's a French poet, Henri Michaud.
How did you come upon his work? I mean, it's such an unusual choice. I've not heard anybody mention Michaud in this context.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. I love how Michaud worked with poem form, you know, how he broke cliches and how he shaped poetry as a genre, how it works. And perhaps, I guess, Wisława Szymborska is similar to him in this approach, how her poetry works with idioms and so on. And Semenko is, you know, he is the founder of Ukrainian futurism in literature, and he wrote in his poem, When Walt Whitman Died, 1892, I was born. Semenko decomposed word to describe reality.
I know that's an important idea in your poetics, the sort of decomposition of the word and language. Could you say something about that? Because that's a really kind of compelling notion. And it's also happened in American poetry as well.
Semenko decomposed word to describe urban reality and this sound of cities and towns. Lots of car appeared in city.
No, I agree. You know, because it's a period of industrialization, and suddenly there's a whole new sound and machinery is entering into urban life. And so it sounds very much like the role he played was something like T.S. Eliot in The Wasteland, describing London, you know, in the early 20th century, and the sense of unreality and strangeness also that brings to the human sensibility, the way that it sort of changes the way we perceive things. And so I assume that's part of what you mean by kind of the decomposition of language, in that it's no longer kind of a continuous flow as you experienced in a much more kind of natural environment, right? Where there is a seamlessness between human nature and nature itself. Whereas in the cities, we're much more enveloped by the artifacts of our own invention. And thereby that's, you know, that's, but so what does that do to language? How does language convey that?
I guess when someone destroys a word, a language reflects it. And when Russia started the war in Ukraine 8 years ago, actually, I realized that I couldn't write as before, and because words' meanings had been changed, and something had happened to language. And now I could give some examples. For instance, after this, when even in Kyiv we had experience of firing, rockets firing, and we know these things like about light. We couldn't turn on light at night because it shows to occupiers that there is cities, and it's like kind of we should hide and cover our cities, and we cannot use a light, and light it means something dangerous at night for us, and before light had another meaning for Ukrainians. It was something good, something which could clarify things, and now it's became dangerous. And I should have worked with this changing, and I realized that I needed to look for a new approach to writing, and poetry is flexible for language changes, for experiments, and sure, it's definitely that Semenko helped me with his word kind of decomposition, but he made it in another way because it was he tried to describe sounds and something like this, like a kind of city mess maybe. It's like everything isn't in order. But if we are talking about me, I tried, and I'm trying to describe a city with which is destroying right now, and I'm trying to collect this part of cities using this approach. Yeah, and it's always interesting how during kind of reality changing, language is changing, and I try to catch up this reality with my language.
Yeah, no, of course. And then, of course, you have social media and the way in which technology and hybrid life has also altered our sense of immediacy and connection. Because on the one hand, we are able to connect with each other across great distances. And on the other hand, it's a very different sensation and feeling, isn't it? To be connecting not in person, but through this particular medium. And so that too requires a kind of reconfiguration of meaning. But it's very powerful what you say about the way in which the word light, which we always associate with something very positive, suddenly becomes something dangerous, you know, and that's unsettling to think of. So in your introduction to Apricots of Donbass, you describe the sort of the slow inception of the war in the East, and it's been really important for us here in the West to recognize that this war, to which we just began paying attention in February, has been going on for 8 years now. I wonder, what were the early signs of it, and what were the kinds of responses that you were forced to make in the kind of early days of 2014?
First, I was in Luhansk. It was end of April 2014, and first strangers with gun appeared in the city of Luhansk, which is about 100 kilometers. It's about 60 miles, I guess, from my parents' home. And at this time, I came to Luhansk from Kyiv for a visit, to visit my parents, and festival should have been near Luhansk, and I was staying at my sister's in her rented apartment in Luhansk. And it was like very odd feeling when gaunt strangers walk the streets of your city. And I met one of them in a supermarket, and it was unexpected for me, and I was petrified because of this. And but for my sister, it already was like something usual, like some usual thing for her, and also these people there were standing in front of capture's building of the Luhansk city and administration. It was near Department of the Ukrainian Security Service and so on. And one time someone with a machine gun in his hand was running right past me on street. It was Radyanska streets, like Soviet street in Luhansk in the time. It was strange things, and everything what was like petrifying for me wasn't so strange and petrifying for my sister and for my parents, because step by step they became accustomed with this reality, and they hoped that Ukrainian government would help them, and everything would be fine, and so on.
So I think a very important experience to notice, and it's that sense of our growing used to the terrible and the something that we should not become accustomed to. The American psychiatrist and scholar Robert J. Lifton has a phrase for this. He calls it malignant complacency. That is, the danger that lies in our growing too accustomed to something that we should not accept at all. And in some ways, that's a bit of what I think happens with anything that continues on and on, in the way that we are all concerned that this war will continue on and on. And there is a desire to make sure that we here, who are far from things, do not settle into that malignant complacency and begin to tolerate the intolerable. Something that I talk about often with friends here is, in the face of something as overwhelming as a war, poetry can seem beside the point. And yet it seems that people are turning to it more intensely than ever. I remember there's this poem of Czeslaw Milosz's in which he writes, "What is poetry that does not save nations or people? A connivance with official lies, a song for drunkards whose throats will be slit in a moment." It's that sense of the importance of poetry at such a time. And I wonder, why do you think it is? What does poetry offer at such a time?
After war started in Ukraine, our audience were rising, and sometimes I had 800 of people during poetry reading, and it's strange things, I guess, and people, I guess maybe people are looking for someone who could give them voice and could emphasize which isn't so easy emphasize. We had lots of people who could do lots of things and who have lots of different professions and develop their capability and their skills in these professions. But if we are talking about words, about language, it's usually writers, it's usually poets who could give words for people. Cooker could give people something unexpected, some feeling, some taste of new taste of food, and it's kind of emotions as well. But poets could give people also kind of emotions and way to emphasize people emotions, something like this. Maybe it sounds a little bit pathetic, I guess, but I don't know how to describe it in another way. I'm sorry.
No, hardly at all. It sounds just right. I mean, I think that is exactly what that's the skill that writers cultivate, is how to find language to accommodate changing realities, because reality is always changing. And somehow that's what the role of poetry has become, I think, across the world. And it's been one of the ways in which, one of the reasons I think that poets have been called the antennae of the race, because there is a sort of innate capacity to recognize the changes before others do, or rather to find the language for the changes before others do. I'm reminded of an essay by the Armenian American poet Peter Balakian. It's called With Primo Levi with Dante in Auschwitz. And it's when Primo Levi was in Auschwitz, he was consoled by remembering long passages from Dante's Inferno. There was a consolation in having that language and having that sense that such experiences of hell have been lived through before. And so there is that kind of consolation as well, I think, that poetry can offer. So we're now 3 months into this war. Do you have a sense of how things are going to unfold in the future? And uh, are there things that you believe that we here outside of Ukraine should know and should be paying attention to?
I believe Ukraine will prevail, and I see how all world wanted to help us, and it's really like good and big support for us, and we should pay. Everyone should pay attention on human rights and in Ukraine, and now it's like under question because of Russian occupiers who raped people, who killed people, and kidnapped children. About 2,000 of children were kidnapped from Ukraine to Russia, and I know that after a few months, it's usually people people could be exhausted because of war, because this bad emotions. It's like it's usual things, of course, but Ukraine still need help, and people are dying right now, and now I'm in Kyiv, and I know that like 500 kilometers to south, people are dying right now, and we should just remember, just keep it in mind, and remember that we should do something, maybe a little for this for people, for that our that freedom could prevail in this war, and maybe something some little things, but we should do every day it, and maybe not maybe I aware, and I believe that it will be very helpful, and that Ukraine will prevail in this war, but we have no choice, actually. Just instead of we have no choice. We should just be a winner, and it is more than just Ukrainian and Russian war. It's war for world freedom, I guess. And we will see how could it be, and this threatening for whole world from Russian politicians, and yeah, we should just work. It's like hard and everyday work on this.
Yes, no, I agree. I mean, I think that it's essential that we here recognize that Ukraine is really on the front lines of the fight for democracy worldwide, because it is a system that seems to be in retreat and under attack everywhere, and yet it seems to be the only hope that we have for allowing us individually and collectively to live freely. And so I absolutely agree that Ukraine will prevail, and that the world will continue to stand with it and support it in every way possible. Lyuba, I wonder if you might be able to read, or to end up with a, could we end with a poem? Could you read us or recite a poem of yours? Might you have something handy? I know I had not.
I will read a poem of old age. It's pretty short, I guess. Of old age. And old man and old woman died of the same day, on the same hour, on the same minute. People said they died of old age. Their hen died, as died their goat and their dog, but the cat wasn't home, and people said they died of old age. Their house fell apart, their shed turned into a ruin, the cellar was powdered over with dust. People said they were just too old. The children came to bury the old man and the old woman. Oля was pregnant, Sergei was drunk, Sonya was only 3, and they died too, and people said they had died of old age. A cold wind plucked off the yellow leaves and buried under them the old man, the old woman, Oля, Sergei, and Sonya, who all died of old age. Translated by Svetlana Lavochkina.
That's so powerful. I wonder if would you be able to read that in Ukrainian?
Yeah, sure. Від старості. Померли дід і баба. В один день померли. В одну годину, в одну хвилину. Люди говорили, що від старості. Здохла їхня курка, їхня коза та собака, а кішки не було вдома. І люди говорили, що від старості. Розвалилась їхня хата, сарай став руїною, і погріб зверху присипало землею. Люди говорили, що від старості розвалились. Прийшли їхні діти ховати діда з бабою. Оля була вагітна, Сергій був п'яний, а Соня мала 3 рочки. І вони теж померли, а люди говорили, що від старості. Холодний вітер обірвав жовте листя і поховав під ним діда, бабу, Олю, Сергія, Соню, які померли від старості.